It's a little unclear. One of the things that's been reported is that other people have come forward, and it's a little I haven't seen the bail papers, so I'm a little unclear as to who exactly put that money forward. But generally speaking, you don't have to put up the full amount. You basically, various people will pledge that they'll be responsible for that amount if he doesn't show up at any hearing. But as the judge pointed out, he is so notorious at this point that it'd be very difficult for him to flee and to go anywhere where he wouldn't be recognized immediately.
Howard Fisher, former SEC senior trial counsel, joins the CNBC Squawk Box televisions who was discussing the Sam Bankman-Fried who was paid the $250 million bail. According to the Fox Business, former assistant U.S.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a sham, Jackie. I mean, you don't say that you have to have $250 million to avoid somebody from fleeing from the charges and then let him leave basically on a signature. I mean, I'm sure his parents have a very nice house in Palo Alto. I'm betting it's probably not worth anything close to $250 million. So I think they wanted to make a splash and say, that they got a bail amount that was the biggest bail amount in the history of bail amounts. But, the Bernie Madoff $10 million that you were talking about, that was a real actual $10 million.
Right.
Where he had to come up with collateral and things that they could execute on if he actually fled. Here, it's true that like anybody who signs that bond will be on the hook for the face amount of the bond, which is $250 million if he takes off. But do they really think that they can execute on anything close to $250 million based on that bond where they haven't made anybody post property to speak of other than that house? I really don't think so.
Attorney and the anti-security voice on FTX founder Sam Bankman-Fried posting $250 million bond, and the former Alameda CEO and the FTX co-founder cooperating with the federal officials on
across social media, as you said. So this right to bail, though, it's really governed by the Constitution's 8th Amendment, particularly. Now, it's not an absolute right, but it does prohibit what's called excessive bail. And that flows from the fact that in the U.S., a criminal defendant is presumed innocent until they're proven guilty in a court of law. So there are two central questions, two justifications, actually, that a judge is going to look at. And there's two that in particular allow a judge to detain a defendant. And one is to keep the public safe. If they're a threat to the community's safety, the judge can say, you got to stay behind bars. Second is to ensure that the defendant will actually show up in court to face the charges against him or her. So in Bankman-Fried's case, like in most white-collar cases, the judge said, well, Bankman-Fried is not a danger to the community, despite those that argue otherwise, perhaps, financial risks, they say. So this case really, for the judge yesterday, it turned on flight risk. And to combat flight, the judge can impose financial and other types of consequences. So that's one reason why you saw the judge agree to the prosecutor's request of that whopping $250 million bond. Now, typically, a defendant needs to pledge enough assets that equal about 10% of that bond amount. So here in this case, it would be $25 million. Bankman-Fried's bond is secured in part by his family's.
YAHOO Finance legal correspondent Alexis Keenan discusses news that disgraced FTX founder Sam Bankman-Fried has been released on $250 million bail and the constraint placed upon him as he awaits a criminal proceeding. Hello, welcome back again. Subscribe the Bitcoin Thinking channels and turning on the red notifications button. So back to the main topics, guys. Now that the Sam Bankman-Fried is back in the US, he has been released from the federal custody. The New York Times and the CNBC report the co-founder of the failed and the allegedly fraudulent cryptocurrency exchange FTX was released on the $250 million bail, secured by his appearance home ahead of his trial on 8 criminal charges he faced, in addition to the civil suits filed by the SEC and the CFTC. Prosecutor says billions in the customers and investors' funds are missing, accusing small circles of the insiders at the FTX and the Bankman-Fried customer hedge fund amid the research of the misusing the money of themselves from the very starts of their operation. For now 30 years old, whose net worth had been calculated to be in the billions until the recently, will live in the San Francisco with his appearance, well-known law professor at the Stanford, wearing an electronic monitoring devices. Sam Bankman-Fried is scheduled to appear in the person at the next hearing in the afternoon of the January 3rd in New York City. We didn't see any mentions of any restrictions from using computers or the internet, but now that the charges have been filed, it would be even more shocking if Sam Bankman-Fried's Zoom and the Twitter Spaces powered media tour continues. The US attorney assigned to the case against the Bankman-Fried debuted it a fraud of the epic proportions, in what may well be the highest ever bond amount before a trial. FTX founder Sam Bankman-Fried is set to be released after posting $250 million, dwarfing that of famed financial fraudster Bernie Madoff, who was granted a $10 million bail agreement in 2008. Bankman-Fried has been ordered to be confined to his appearance Palo Alto, CA home. A federal judge said that the disgraced founder's first New York federal court appearance Thursday. Bankman-Fried faces charges including wire fraud, money laundering, and the violating campaign financial laws. Federal prosecutor did not attempt to withhold bail, but they did not grant what is believed to be the highest ever partial bonds. Assistant U.S. Attorney Nick Rose said during Thursday's hearing that statistics does not appear to account for inflation metrics when it comes to the previous sky-high bail designations for other purported financial fraudsters. Bankman-Fried acquisitions to the U.S. extraditions from the Bahamas, where he lived and was arrested, help his cause for being offered bail to begin with. Rose said that this was a fraud of the epic proportions. Rose said that if that was the only test, and the detentions would likely be to the appropriate, but the voluntarily consent to the extraditions. Consistent to the extraditions that should be given wise. The bond will be signed by the Bankman-Fried as appearance and on one non-family member according to the court proceeding. He is expected to report and partial services in California by 10. This was a fraud of the epic proportions. Rose said that if this is the only test, detentions would likely be the appropriate, but the voluntarily consented to extraditions that should be the given wise. The bond will be assigned by Bankman-Fried, his parents, and one non-family member according to the court proceeding is expected to report to the partial services in California by 10 Friday. The defendant has achieved a sufficient notoriety, it would be impossible for him to continue financial transactions. This notoriety also gives to the risk of the flight, federal judge Gabriel Grunstein said during the hearing. He would be recognized, so I am going to the permit release. The $250 million bail ranks in the historical upper echelon from the U.S. even when accounting for inflations. The figure, for instance, dwarfs Bernie Madoff's $10 million stipulations in the 2008. After the story was published, details emerged that the Bankman-Fried parents were planning to put equity in their California home, where he is slated to confined up as a collateral against a bail bond from the embattled son. Requirements additionally mandates that a third individual who cannot be related to the Bankman-Frieds also sign off on the bond agreement. A 10% of the payment is sufficient to the secure bail, which would be the returns if and when the appearance of the trials. The details of the parents of the Bankman-Frieds moving to put their homes equity for a collateral against their son and his bonds also added details and the bail payment process, as well as context and categorizing his bail amount. The bail conditions for Bankman-Fried on bail included a $250 million bond. The terms that were proposed by the authorities are accepted by the SBF. According to his defense authority, California Listen and the Gary Wang had admitted a responsibility for numbers of crimes. According to legal advisors, Sam Bankman-Fried may face a life imprisonment alongside Ellison and the Wang, who paid the bond for Sam Bankman-Fried. Let me discuss that. The bail conditions for Bankman-Fried on bail included a $250 million bond. $250 million bond, home confinements, locations, monitoring, and surrendering his passport. According to the reports by the SBF's, bail had been approved, and the New York Times announced on December 22 that he would be returning to live with his parents in Palo Alto, California. His parents bought his bail with the value of their house. The terms that are proposed by the authorities are accepted by the Sam Bankman-Fried, according to his defense attorney. He was arrested a few days in the Bahamas at the request of the American officials. At the time, he was offered no bail because of his fleeing. Later on December 20, the Federal Bureau of the Investigation took him back to the country. FTX co-founder Sam Bankman-Fried, better known as Sam Bankman-Fried, has been released on $250 million bond, but guess what? It does not actually require him to come up with the cash. Instead, the release agreement showed that Sam Bankman-Fried was being released on a $250 million personal reconnaissance, but that was secured by his parents' 5-bedroom home in Palo Alto. If Sam Bankman-Fried fails to appear in the court or violate other conditions of his bail, then the property would be seized. That property is estimated to be worth only $4 million. In addition to his 2 parents, the bond must be signed by 2 other people, one of whom cannot be a relative, by January 5, 2023, and that would be all of one of the $250 million bail. This no cash upfront bail deal was worked on between Sam Bankman-Fried's legal team and the US prosecutor, which include his agreement to be extradited to the United States. New York Federal Court Gary Greenstein's released, subject to the detention at his parents' home, will be wearing an electronic monitoring bracelet with a mandatory mental health counseling and the substance abuse treatment. Sam Bankman-Fried had to surrender his passport under the bail agreement and was strict to travel to the Northern District of the California, or the Southern and the Eastern Districts of the New York of the court and appearances. Breaking: Sam Bankman-Fried released on the $250 million bail bond, thought that only had $100K in his bank account. Sam Bankman-Fried is getting released on a $250 million bail. Wait, he said he only had $100K left. Oh, and he's probably just using a depositor's money again. Silly me. Sam Bankman-Fried stole billions of the customers' money, was released on a bail, and is flying first class. Ross Ulbricht, creator of website, is still serving 2 life sentences in the prisons in justice areas of finest. Sam Bankman-Fried released on a $250 million bond. I only have $100K in my bank account. That's it for today. If you haven't already, subscribe the Bitcoin Thinking channel and turning on the red notifications button. So see you next time.